Welcome to Ask Lynn, everyone. Today I have Tim with me, and I'm going to let Mr. Tim take it away and share his story. And I'll be asking him a couple baseline questions, and then you guys can listen and enjoy. So, welcome,
So
Tim.
good afternoon, Wynn. Thank you very much for allowing me to come on your show. I appreciate the time.
Well, I appreciate having you on. So, Tim, can you please explain to my audience more about what you do?
Well, I have solved the marriage problem. And that might sound unusual to your audience because they've never heard that before. I'm actually the first person to solve the marriage problem. And so this is all going to be new. And what I do that's new is I address marriages mentally. And believe it or not, that's never happened before. A little bit about my background. I actually do not have a psychology degree, and that turns out to be important. I actually have an engineering degree, an MBA, and I was the first semiconductor analyst on Wall Street to focus on the communications market. So that was my claim to fame. And at the height of the market in 2000, I met this girl that I thought I was gonna spend the rest of my life with. We've met, fell in love, started arguing, went to a therapist, and when I realized the therapist wasn't helping is when I decided to take on the journey myself on solving the problem. So I literally spent almost 2 years researching and writing my marriage book. And literally every couple that I work with, by the time I'm done working with them, their marriage is on the right track. So it's pretty profound. All I do basically is eliminate arguments from marriages. If you can imagine your marriage without arguments, that's basically what I do. You know, disagreements, conflicts are inevitable, and it's how you deal with conflicts that determines the difference between success or failure. How can you solve the marriage problem unless you solve the marriage problem? So it's conflict resolution.
So, okay, it's conflict resolution. Well, we all know that. Most of us know that unless we're living under a rock. But what would you say to married couples who are listening to this, or children who are listening to this, actually? Um, what would you say is the biggest strain on marriages? I can name a couple, but I'm gonna let you go first before I jump in.
As it turns out, the biggest key to a marriage is the relationship with the parents, because that's where you first learn about love. Under this concept, because what I basically teach is the notion of development. And under the notion of development, the earlier you are in the stage of development, the more vulnerable you are to, let's just say, negative lessons. So, when are you the youngest at birth? Who are the biggest influences on you at birth? Your parents. So, for example, if your parents got divorced, then you might bring that fear of your marriage ending into the marriage. And unfortunately, the way that the mind works is if you fear something, it will happen, unfortunately, because that becomes the thing that causes the conflicts or your fears. And it's generally, what's so amazing about it is it's generally not your partner that's the cause of the problems. They're what you think are the cause of the problems, because they're the ones that you're in front of at the time. But what you're doing is you're basically projecting your fears from your childhood, in essence. And so the biggest key to a successful marriage, or the biggest indication of a marriage, is the relationship with the parents. And so I make people conscious of what they were raised, what they were taught about marriage and relationships from their upbringing, so that they now have what they should focus on for healing. The only reason why I can confidently and comfortably stand in front of anybody and tell them that I have solved the marriage problem, put my education and career aside, is because I forgave my parents when I was 25 years old, and what turns out to be the most significant day of my life because it opened my mind up to the objectivity of a relationship. And it's the subjectivity of the individual because of their upbringing that generally causes the problems. And so, if I can eliminate that subjectivity, and the foundation for a successful marriage is common sense, which is what the masses would agree on something. If you can use common sense as the foundation for your marriage, it ends up that your conflicts become very simple to resolve. But it's when the subjectivity of the individual, not based on common sense, is what's used as the focus or the motivation of the conversation. Whenever there's conflicts, that conflicts become unresolvable. You cannot solve a conflict when it turns into an argument. You can only, which is an emotional, which is fault finding, which is backward looking. The only way you could solve a problem is when it's in a disagreement, which is problem solving and forward looking and logical. So as long as you can keep your conflicts logical instead of emotional, you're able to solve them. It's once it turns into an emotional conflict that it becomes unresolvable. To argue with someone who has abandoned the use of reason is like administering medicine to the dead. Once that conflict becomes an argument, it becomes unresolvable.
And so, okay. And
Yeah, I
as
just gave
we,
you a lot of info. I know that. Sorry about that, Wayne.
well, that's okay. As we record this, we're sitting at the end of a pandemic. At the end of a pandemic, yes, I say the end because there is vaccines rolling out in the U.S. and the being trapped at home with your significant other doesn't help, and being trapped at home with your kids doesn't help. So, what advice would you give, Tim, to people that are still in states that are in lockdown to help save their marriages?
Well, first of all, I saw a statistic the other day that the divorce rate since the virus has hit is up 30%. But I will tell you, when we look back in hindsight at the virus, one of the things I believe we're going to come out of this understanding is the virus, because we are now forced to spend more time together, is actually highlighting what's really important in life. Unfortunately, before the virus hit, we were a very materialistic society. And so, in essence, what we do is we place our marriage at the bottom of the priority list and put how much money we make, how big is the house, the car, how pretty we are, or these materialistic concepts are at the forefront. But I will tell you that couples that are on the right track, the virus is going to be a godsend because they got to spend more time together. And those are the ones that are going to realize that their marriage is more important than these outside materialistic factors. But you were talking about is couples that are not getting along. And in essence, what is the goal of my teaching is to make conscious what is unconscious, or else it appears as fate. In essence, what I do is I break down arguments into their component parts. As it turns out, there's a process that we go through that leads to us being judgmental and angry. And the steps of what I call the hierarchy of the argument is it begins with an insecurity. Again, your parents got divorced, you're now afraid of that. Insecurity is a fear and anxiety, which then leads to a prejudice. A prejudice is a preconceived opinion which has not been thought out. Now, we know about prejudice from our social spheres, but what I teach couples are what I call relationship prejudices. Again, your parents got divorced. Now you have a prejudice based on that previous experience, a preconceived opinion that does not need to be thought out anymore. That's the great thing about our social prejudices is we realize that what prejudices do is they basically answer the question for us without having to think. I grew up with my dad with the N word. I used to get so mad at him but he never had to think about that. He would just say the N word, and that summarized his thought of a whole group of people. And relationship prejudices do the same thing, except now it's directed towards your partner. That prejudice then becomes judgmental, which then leads to anger. And so, what I do when I explain this is I, in essence, connect the dot between fear and anger. And so, when somebody gets angry, if you're able to stop that conversation, you come home late from work and your partner gets mad at you. Now, the foundation of this conversation is that you are not doing anything wrong. One of the questions that or actually one of the most important questions that I try to answer is, how do you deal with a conflict when you're not really doing anything bad? It's a mistake, or in fact, one of the things I realize is that we all make mistakes. It's a mistake. And also, what's so interesting about conflicts and mistakes is nobody thinks ahead of time about upsetting their partner. So you come home late from work because you did get that call at 5 o'clock. You're on the phone for an hour. You may have forgot to call your partner up, but you come home late from work and your partner gets mad at you. Now, generally, because of the fight or flight instinct, you defend yourself. Well, I had a call. No, you said you were going to come home at 5, and that goes back and forth. But if couples can simply learn to turn the conversation, because again, the reality is your partner's not getting mad at you because you come home late from work. Your partners get mad at you because of some fear, self-esteem, fear of abandonment, things that they learned from their upbringing that they're now projecting into the marriage. And if you could turn that conversation based on their fear. So what I teach couples to do is the what are you afraid of question. So you come home late for work, your partner gets mad at you. As long as your conscience is clear because you weren't doing anything wrong, you don't have to defend yourself. You simply turn the conversation back towards them on what are they afraid of. Then you could address the real issue. It's not that they're home late from work, but it's that something in the other person's upbringing that they're afraid of seeing happening with their partner. So if you can learn this while you two are spending so much more time together, then you are able to learn to grow together. In essence, what I do is I teach couples to take on the world instead of each other. And once they learn these conflict skills, then they're able to really figure out the problem. And that's where it continues as a logical disagreement, which ultimately leads to the healing process, which is what happens when you forgive your upbringing and let go of your childhood. As it turns out, we are supposed to be born twice. The first time is obvious, biological. But as it turns out, we are also supposed to be born mentally into adulthood. The bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah in the Jewish tradition, the first communion in the Catholic or the Christian tradition, even barbaric traditions in antiquity are all these rituals to initiate us into adulthood. Unfortunately, the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah, and the first communion happened to us when we were about 12 or 13 years old, which at the time was when we became adults, but now we don't become adults until we're in our 20s. And so what you're basically doing is you're helping your partner go through that mental birth of being born into adulthood. And once you learn that as the first step to, in essence, what becomes mental maturity, you're able to help each other grow. My biography won't be finished until my obituary, and only God knows my real name. Life is a journey, and when couples learn to grow together, then they can learn to become a couple and a partner together.
Well, I understand where you're coming from, and I hope that after you're done listening to this episode, you guys, I hope that it would help you get back on the right track, because that's all Tim and I are here to do, is help you guys get back on the right track. Now, Tim, what is your favorite book?
20% of my book is a summary of Carl Jung's autobiography, which is basically the most significant book that I read as part of my research. So it's in essence what my objective is to ultimately replace Freud with Jung. I mean, I'm sorry, yeah, replace Freud with Jung. And so that's what I'm in the process of doing. So it's Carl Jung's autobiography.
It's Carl Jung's autobiography that happened to be your favorite book.
It's called
And
Memories, Dreams, and Reflections.
Memory, Dreams, and Reflections happened to be your favorite book. And that's fascinating to me. And now, if you had, I presume you work with people internationally, I presume you work with people locally in the state of Florida, mind you. And so, where can people find you and where can people get a hold of you if they choose to do so?
The best thing to do is to email me. My email address is Tim Kellis, TimKellis, at Happy Relationships, plural, happyrelationships.com. Or they can join it's called the Marriage Support Group on Facebook. So go to Facebook, search the Marriage Support Group, and they can join my group and stay in contact with me that way. But the best way is to email me at timkellis at happyrelationships.com.
And Tim, as we wrap this interview up, do you have any questions for me?
No, I'm good. I appreciate the time that you gave me to come in and interview with you.
Well, I appreciate you coming in and interviewing with me, and then I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you use Tim and his resources, and I hope that you will use Tim if you guys need to. I know that the pandemic has been tough on all of us, and we'll make it work. And let's make 2021 the best year yet, you guys. Let's do this. Bye, you guys. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Win.